Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Travis Shinglebecker, and I'm a Senior Director here at Aperio Philanthropy. Aperio is a consulting firm with a vision for a future in which everyone can thrive. We exist to unleash the power of communities to drive change by dramatically expanding resources for nonprofits. Day to day, we work alongside community leaders and fundraisers to develop a simpler, faster, and smarter way to generate the revenue for nonprofit missions. Our client services provide strategic advisory, hands-on support, and embedded fundraisers to organizations nationwide. We are excited to host a three-part series this summer, the Relationship-Based Fundraising Toolbox, where we will be going back to the basics of relationship-based fundraising. Today's webinar will be the third and final part of this series and will focus on creating a roadmap to your fundraising goal. As questions come up, please submit them via the Q&A tool and they will be addressed at the end of today's session. As follow-up, we will be sharing a recording of today's webinar alongside a path to goal spreadsheet template in about a week's time. It is now my pleasure to kick it over to our facilitators for today, Kelly Bronick and Jessica Jones.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Travis mentioned, this is the last session that we'll have during our summer series. During the previous session, we focused on donor engagement planning, which is creating a tactical steps to engage for all donors. This week is the final session. We're going to be discussing creating a roadmap to your goal with a focus on portfolio and one-to-one relationship management to achieve those revenues goals. Before we get started, a little bit about us. We believe that nonprofits can do more than survive, but rather that you all can thrive. We believe that your mission, your donors, and your team all have more potential, and we're here to make it simple for you all to realize that potential. As you're going to hear today, our passion is for going beyond great ideas. We know that the challenge is less often what we need to do, but rather how to get it done among competing priorities. We have listened, learned, and really distilled what works into a clear roadmap that any nonprofit can follow. And the building blocks of that roadmap are what you see in front of you here. Your people, having a clear business model, and of course, a culture of philanthropy. We work alongside organizations large and small to implement this roadmap and unlock new fundraising potential. My name is Kelly Bronick. I am a senior advisor with Aperio. My career has been focused on leading strategy in the development operations space for many nonprofit organizations. I am especially passionate about helping organizations level up their operations and implementing efficiencies to create that solid foundation that you need for your development teams to better serve your mission. I am here today with my colleague, Jessica Jones. Jessica, I'll kick it to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Kelly, and hi, everyone. I am Jessica Jones, and I'm a Senior Director here at Aperio Philanthropy. I began my fundraising journey as a major gifts coordinator in higher ed and eventually served as a major gift officer, a road warrior like many of you, kind of interacting, donor-facing, building programs, and then grew to really lead successful development programs at nonprofits in the US and abroad. I think of myself as a doer and a program builder who loves to empower fundraisers and nonprofits to lean into and actually realize your fundraising potential so that you can amplify your impact.
Amazing. Today, we're going to cover how to create a path to your goal by using reverse engineering. We're going to walk through building a short list of priority donors, and then we'll detail how to design your ask plans for those donors. And finally, what will it take to actually work those plans that we've created together? So I want us to start by talking a little bit about the word goal and all the weight that that word holds for us as fundraisers. On one hand, many of us, myself included, describe ourselves as goal-oriented. We see goals and aspiring to reach them as a good thing. We want to see our organizations grow and thrive, of course. On the other hand, goal is a loaded word It means a big, hairy number. Often it means a big, hairy number that someone else chose on our behalf. It means the clock is resetting at the beginning of each fiscal year. It means starting back at square one. And sometimes it means the difference between programs moving forward, impact being achieved, and our colleagues' jobs continuing. That is a lot of pressure, and we know that it is. It's no wonder that we have complicated feelings about goals, especially those big, hairy ones. We have all come too long for goals that are achievable based on the donors that we have, based on the momentum that we have, based on our team size, our bandwidth. And so many fundraisers tell me, I have this goal, I don't know where it came from, and I don't think it's achievable. So probably the biggest learning that I've had personally in my career is that I am the one who makes the goals achievable. I've started shifting the question from, is this goal achievable, to what will it take to make this goal achievable? By shifting our focus from, is this goal achievable, to what would make it achievable, we're really freeing ourselves to get going. We give ourselves the agency to start proactively working on figuring it out. This goal will become achievable through what you see in front of you. What efforts? By whom? By when? Using what resources? So the way to really think about this is like a road trip. I live in Kansas City. Let's say that I want to get to Seattle by next week to see a friend. I could panic, get in the car and go, driving in the direction that I think makes the most sense, going one step at a time. I could probably get there eventually, but it would be difficult to get there in time, and it would absolutely be stressful. I would also waste a lot of time, energy, and gas taking wrong turns. And if I were my friend, I wouldn't count on me. So if instead I approached this by spending a little bit of time up front, mapping out my plan, getting my car ready, figuring out what roads I need to take, where should I stop, where should I stay overnight, I'm going to have a lot easier of a time. I'm much more likely to get to Seattle in time, much more likely to be able to deal with the inevitable hiccups and emergencies, and much less likely to waste time and gas. It will also be a lot less stressful. And in this case, with all of this planning, my friend can really count on me being there. Similarly, when we have our revenue goal, all we have is the destination. We need to figure out the route and do the necessary preparations. And then we need to use our plans. Only then can an organization really count on us to deliver the revenue that is needed for the mission. You can think of your job as building a new puzzle every single year. We have all of the pieces, a lot of donors, a lot of stories, and plenty of work hours. One way to build a puzzle is to just start moving the pieces around randomly to see if you can figure out how any of them fit together. That to me sounds like chaos, as someone who really enjoys building puzzles. Most of us develop some sort of system. We sort by the edges, by the middle, by the corners, and we group the colors, starting by deciding what sections to work on first. Similarly, most of us already have all the assets that we need to reach our goals, even those lofty stretch goals. The question isn't what we need to do it, it's ultimately how we put all those assets to work, how we use them systematically to build towards the full and complete picture. Working without a plan is chaotic, it's cluttered, it's frustrating, and taking a systematic approach is proven to be much more effective, even when it's hard work. At least that work is building up to something. So on today's webinar, we're going to walk you through the 4 steps in making your goal achievable, really taking the reins into your hands and getting going. This is the equivalent of planning your road trip and hitting the road, or getting your puzzle pieces organized and then getting to building. So the steps that we're going to talk through here are, first, reverse engineering the path to your goal, including some specific numbers or metrics that you can use to keep on track. Creating a short list of relationships to focus on, or a portfolio, as we call it. The third piece is planning the work for that shortlist that we've identified. And then finally, it's working the plan. Keep the pace with the metrics that you've set for yourself and your team. So let's dig into reverse engineering the path to your goal. It starts by knowing what your goal is and understanding the donors in your organization's database or in your specific portfolio. I personally find that having a visual element helps to make the big goal into more manageable pieces. And this is where donor pyramids, or gift tables, as they're called, will come in handy. So a donor pyramid is a visual roadmap to your goal that breaks out the number of donors needed at each giving level. Creating a pyramid or gift table will allow you to sort and prioritize donors by ask amount. It allows you to establish the number of asks that you'll need to make the asks that you'll need to make to reach your goal, and determine the number of donors that you'll need to engage with in order to achieve your goal. It also demonstrates to your team leadership and your board what it's going to take to meet the goal that's been set, so that we have buy-in and understanding across all functions. And then finally, it's really identifying whether additional resources or support will be needed in order to achieve the goal. So here you can see a sample of a gift table. In this example, the team has a goal of raising $2.5 million. You can see that they're aiming for a largest gift of $500,000 toward that goal. Now, the middle range is looking for about $50,000 to $99,000 gifts that total $400K of the goal, with the lower dollar amounts, those that are under 10K, collectively add up to $250,000 of the goal. Ultimately, as you move through the table, they end up needing 44 major gifts, and moving through this practice will allow you to understand for your own personal organizational team and independent goals how many gifts and how we break them down. So when you're working on your gift table, it's important to remember that the lower you go on the gift table, the more gifts you'll need to reach the same number. In this example, we've created a different path to the same goal. So this is on the next slide, which doesn't have that lead gift of 500,000 and relies more on the gifts that are under 100,000. In this example, the team needs to raise 75 gifts or 30 more gifts, or 74% more gifts than in the prior example. And that is a lot more work. Really, the key in doing this work is to stay realistic in your spread. So referring to prior years as guidance, while setting some stretch goals that help your team move up the gift table a little bit. That will set you up to focus your time on the highest potential opportunities. Less is more if you're really stretched then, and I'm sure most of you know that. So a few technical tips for you all. Start by making your gift table for last year. You have the data to work from for last year. Use the real number of gifts and the real revenue provided in the chart. Adjust the gift ranges to make sense for your organization. Keep it simple by not going too low down. Group the small gifts together, and then look at it to determine how you want to grow your plan this year. So you use last year's to really drive what you want to do this year. Look at the biggest gifts carefully to determine if they are repeatable, or if you would need to replace them to achieve the same gift table, or maybe you want to add a new stretch level for a top gift. Ultimately, for your gift table, use the bottom of the range in the math in the revenue column to be conservative. So some other ideas, you just want to make sure that you're setting your goal. We're evaluating the donors that you have in your database based on their giving history and capacity to the best of your knowledge. Identify the gift ranges where you could have clusters of donors. Identify donors who give in each range, again, based on giving history and capacity, and evaluate what's possible given your current donor base and identify those ranges. It'll be required to kind of move through all of these pieces in order to meet your goal. All right, so once we have the number of gifts that we need, we can reverse engineer the rest of your path to goal. The way that we do this is by thinking through what it will take to receive every single gift. First, we know that not every person that we ask to give, or will give when or at the level that we've asked. That means that to be sure we receive that gift in our gift table of, say, 100,000, we have to ask at least 3 people for $100,000. Next, we know that an ask is a conversation. We have to learn about the donor. We need to help them learn about the opportunity with the organization, and we have to work through the ask. Even for a renewal, there is more to explore with the donor. There always should be. That means that for every ask we make, whether it results in a gift or not, we have to meet with the donor multiple times. Now, on average, we're looking at about 3 meetings per week. These days, a meeting could be a visit in someone's home, it could be a Zoom, or it could even be a pre-scheduled phone call where we have time to really connect on the prospective donor and really get to know each other. Regardless, it's multiple substantive conversations. And then, of course, we all know that the meetings don't just materialize. It takes work to actually establish that rapport with a donor, to coordinate that meeting, to follow up from that meeting, and to share updates in between meetings. That is a lot of emails, phone calls, and maybe even some snail mail, like a handwritten note. At minimum, every donor that you plan to ask this year should receive a personalized touch point from you at least once a month. These are touch points that are over and above anything that they're receiving from your direct response, such as mass emails, mass physical mail, or event invitations. So it needs to fall outside of that realm. And these are real personalized touch points. When you are just getting to know someone, you really need to do more intensive outreach with 5 to 10 touch points in 6 to 8 weeks. So you see this multiply. As you get to know the donors, you'll adjust the frequency. You'll understand what is the frequency, what is the cadence that I need to be engaging with these donors on. You'll communicate more with some donors, and then others you'll communicate less. It just is really about getting to know them. The point is that we can assume there are a lot of touch points per person that we want to ask, and 12 per year, I would say, is a good starting average. Okay, so let's pull everything that we just talked about together. Here you see our gift table again. We have 2.5 million as the goal, and we have mapped out how many gifts we want to raise at each level. That tells us that we need 45 major gifts. To get those 45 gifts, we know we will need to ask at least 3 times the number of people, because not everyone will say yes, and this is called a coverage ratio. That means we need to make 135 asks to meet that 45 major gift goal. That also means that we need at least 135 donors in our portfolio, probably about 1.5 times that many, because we're not going to be able to ask everyone in our portfolio. We'll talk more about that in the next section. Our 135 asks will require an average of 3 meetings each, which means we are aiming to have 405 donor meetings this year. And our 135 asks also means that we have to stay in touch with these people between meetings, at least an average of once per month, like we mentioned before. And this means that we need to make 1,620 per year. Just to make this point again, there really is not one path to a goal. If we think about our most realistic path to 2.5 million, it's through smaller gifts that we can build out. We just have to make sure that we have the bandwidth for the extra work to go after those smaller gifts. Here's the example again, without that $500,000 lead gift and with more 25K, 10K gifts included. Instead of 45 gifts, we need 75. So that flows through our path to goal. We now need to make at least 225 asks. You see the numbers go up, have 675 meetings, and do 2,700 touch points. Again, if this is the path, that's great. We now have a clear picture of the work ahead and we can plan accordingly. At this point, you might be thinking, yikes, that is a lot. And it is a lot. When you look at a whole goal and all of the work involved, it's overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. We can break it down. So the exciting part is that we can break this down into bite-sized chunks that make our big goal very achievable. Here you can see those metrics again from our gift table. We calculated that to raise 2.5 million, we need 45 gifts, which will take 135 asks, 405 meetings, and the 1,620 touch points. To break this down, we now look at what this will take by month and then even by week. Now our team has an extremely clear picture. If we keep pace with this throughout the year, we can absolutely achieve our goal with a lot of cushion, given the reality that we are not going to get a yes from everyone every single time. The last step in this process is then to assign out these metrics across our team and determine how we're going to hold each other accountable. Jessica will now take us through the who, starting with creating a short list.
Thank you, Kelly. The next step in this process is really to create that short list. So now that we know how we're going to get to our goal, we have to determine who we're going to ask. That's secret in the sauce. In other words, we need to make a clear list of prospective donors to ask for a major gift this year. So understanding who makes up your donor base is essential to creating a fundraising plan that effectively reaches your supporters and encourages them to give more and more frequently. So let's dig into the important question of who are we going to ask? Starting with the numbers. In the scenario we've been exploring, we calculated that we need to make 135 asks to be sure we can bring in 45 gifts. Now, we have to factor in that we'll not be able to ask every prospective donor that we work with. Some donors will just be tough to reach. We've all experienced that. Or maybe we can reach them and realize through conversation that it's not the right time to ask for a major gift. I think we've all been there too. When creating portfolios, we suggest identifying at least 1.5 times the number of prospective donors that you need to ask. And that gives you that coverage ratio. So in this example, that would mean identifying 205 prospective donors for the team's portfolios. And again, we'll assign these out to specific members of the team so that we can all divide the work up. And that is where you do actually have team members to divide the work up. I have also been in the position where you are the only team member. And so that makes having this path to goal even more important. So that short list, as we're thinking about that list, it should be made up of individuals and institutions with capacity to give large gifts, as you can see from the table here. Any donor-facing fundraiser should spend 80% of their time building relationships with their personal portfolio of prospective supporters, meaning those with the high philanthropic potential. I'll say that again, 80% of your time should be donor-facing, revenue-generating activity. So when selecting donors for your portfolio, focus on future potential, not necessarily what they give today. For setting up portfolios, we use the capacity plus rule. So we talked about this in detail during our first session in the summer series, but I'll give you a quick recap just in case you missed it. So, everyone in a portfolio should have verified or suspected financial capacity to give at the major gift level. So keep in mind that wealth screenings and research can only tell you so much. It's not the end all be all. Use that information you have as a starting point, but don't get stuck there. That's where conversations come in with donors. So the key thing to remember is that capacity alone is not enough. We see high capacity folks all over the country who are not philanthropic. And just because someone is philanthropic doesn't mean that our mission will resonate with them. So we're looking for someone who is high capacity and shows some other sign that we can build a relationship with them and at least get a conversation about investing in our mission and vision going. So here are some signs of growth potential. So take a look at that. I won't read it all. And as you're looking at that, remember that your shortlist should include all kinds of donors, including current active donors, lapsed donors, and potential donors. All three of those revenue streams are very important when you're thinking about where these gifts can come from. And then if you're interested in hearing more about that, check out the recording from our first webinar, or feel free to reach out to us and grab some time. We'd be more than happy to connect with you offline and talk through kind of your specific scenarios and challenges and opportunities. So when assigning out donors, let's talk a little bit about that. It's important to keep bandwidth in mind because we are all human and we all have a max capacity. So here are our recommendations. For CEOs or executive directors, what's important is that they engage with your top donors, but it's not necessarily their responsibility to manage a full portfolio. They are managing an organization. They also don't have time to manage a portfolio. So, identify select donors who deserve that level of relationship management and plan to support your CEO or executive director behind the scenes to ensure that a plan is in place for each of those donors. And we'll talk more about that shortly. So, for your leaders within development, think CDOs. You're looking at managing a smaller portfolio. So likely made up of principal or leadership donors and prospects. You really want them focused on tier one, high potential donors. And then for full-time relationship managers, we recommend a portfolio of 75 to 150 donors and prospects. That can vary by organization, by size of your development shop, by your community of supporters. It really depends on your organization, and also the size of your team. So if you're managing companies as well, so companies, institutions, or a mix of those and individuals, it'll likely be on the smaller end of this range, because there's a little bit more that goes into managing companies and institutions when it comes to relationship building and kind of thinking of all of those different avenues and people involved. So remember that portfolios are, that are too big, and I think many of us have been there, often mean that donors get ignored or planned touch points don't get out on time. It's the perennial struggle for fundraisers. And instead, consider making a wish list or a priority portfolio within your middle giving segment if you find that your portfolios are too large. Perhaps it's time to kind of rebalance and think about what the composition looks like from a giving level standpoint. So the next step in the plan is to plan the work. Very important. Now, so it's time to map out an ask plan for each donor on your short list, and we'll walk through how to do that. So asks are at the heart of relationship-based fundraising. If you think about the donor cycle, we tend to put words like cultivation, stewardship, solicitation into the mix. Putting that jargon aside, what we're really trying to do is spark a conversation, ask questions, and interest and inspire donors so that the ask when it comes is a natural step in the process of that conversation. And at Aperio, we think about ask planning as defining the next ideal destination for each relationship with a prospective donor in your portfolio. Some questions we should ask ourselves when planning include: how much do you aim to ask for? By when do you aim to make the ask? What's the most likely gift amount? what is the most likely gift date? And then what is the probability of getting a gift? So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. So as ask plans have essentially these four elements. Let's talk about the amount first. So the planned ask amount is the amount that you plan to ask for. Be bold in your ask, but don't pull a number out of thin air. It should be based on what you know about the donor's giving history, their capacity, and any known factors that might influence their giving throughout the year. And the expected gift amount is the amount that you think you will receive. So there's the amount you want to ask for, and there's the amount you think you'll receive. And be realistic. Consider last year's giving history, the relationship status, and how engaged they are with your mission. This should be a conservative guesstimate, and it's okay if that guesstimate is zero. Because again, not everyone is going to say yes. So earlier we talked about that coverage ratio related to the number of prospects or asks at each gift level. That was essentially 3 to 5 times what you need to ask for. So we want to have a coverage ratio in our ask amounts as well. So the total ask amount should be 3 to 5 times your goal, and the expected gift amount should be 1 to 2 times your goal. So in order for this to be true across the organization's pipeline, it has to be true for the asks you're planning for your portfolio. Here's an example. Maybe you have a donor who has only ever given you an annual contribution of $20,000. Your goal might be to simply ask them to renew this gift. But this year, you have a strong case to make for an increased gift, and you know that this donor has capacity based on their giving to other similar organizations. So your planned ask amount might be $100,000 over 2 years. And this would be a significant jump from their $20,000 annual gift. You might not be sure it'll come through, but you think an increase is possible. So you might make your expected gift amount $30,000. So if you ask for $100,000 over 2 years, you're likely to land a little bit higher and get that donor to think a little bit bigger and more aspirational than their typical annual $20,000. So we have coverage ratios because we know that not every ask will be made, not every donor will say yes, and not every gift will be as big as expected. So next we have our dates. The planned ask date is very obvious. It's the date you plan to make your ask. So this should be around 3 months before you expect to receive the gift. And that timing is really important. And the expected gift date is also obvious. This is when you expect the donor to make their gift. And this could be based on last year's gifts or conversations you've had with them, wherever possible. So I think a mistake fundraisers often make is not making asks well enough in advance when a donor plans to make their gift. So we tend to assume that gifts will be made at the end of the year and plan all of our asks for October, the year-end crush. And if you manage 150 donors in your portfolio, it is nearly impossible for you to make all of those asks in 1 month. So try to spread them out, and that's for calendar year-end asks, or if you're on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year, also fiscal year end. So if donors tend to make gifts around, December or June, back those asks up at least 3 months so that you're having those conversations and making them in enough time for donors to really get their asks or make those gifts and make those asks a little bit more meaningful and time bound. So. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you keep track of all of this because it's a lot, especially when you're managing 150 donors in a portfolio. So ideally, your ask plans should live in your CRM. Understandably, not all organizations have a CRM, but if you do, keep them there. And you can also start with a simple spreadsheet like this one shown. If you're going to use your CRM, you may want to still plan your asks in a spreadsheet, because then you can upload them. It makes review easier through the process as you are working together as a team, and even for yourself as you're kind of looking at everything holistically. If you're going to work in a spreadsheet as your tool throughout the year, also add the columns you see here for stage, where you are in the ask. So just getting started, ask made, verbal commitment received, etc. Actually the actual ask amount, what you actually ask for, the actual ask date, what you actually, when you make the ask, and then the received pledge amount. So the gift you received from your ask to compare to the expected gift amount. And then obviously the received and pledged date so that you know when that gift was received. Whether you use your CRM or a tracker, the key here is to plan all asks, renewals, upgrades in your portfolio. Plan enough asks to cover your gift table plan. In our example, that would be 135. And fill out the plan info. The columns with the stars, which is what you see here, fill those out, even if you don't have full information. The more you can put in, the better off you'll be. And don't be afraid to stretch. Don't leave money on the table. Like, I think the biggest thing I see when working with fundraisers is a fear of asking for more. The donor will tell you if they're not prepared to give as much as you're asking for. Don't be afraid to ask. So a few other tips, each relationship manager should make their own ask plan themselves because they know the donors in their portfolio. And if you're feeling stuck, talk with your colleagues, talk with leadership, have internal conversations, leverage the brain trust of your team, and then check the number of asks per month so that they are reasonable, especially when you're getting to year end. So once you've built the plan, the last step in the process is to work the plan. And if your ask is your destination, then having a moves management plan is your route. It's how you're going to get to your ask. And then moves management is more of that fundraising jargon. But what it really means is the steps you're going to take to engage donors in your mission and get them closer to an ask. So in short, in doing, it's basically doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it and having a plan to get you there. So at Aperio, we talk a lot about 30, 60, 90-day line of sight on your work. Being able to look out about 3 months is key to managing all the touch points and ask plans to reach your goal. The donor engagement plan we talked about 2 weeks ago helps create that baseline experience for all of your donors and the opportunity to layer on one-to-one touch points for personalized relationship management. Your CRM activity through action or task management functions will help you keep track of that day-to-day activity. When it comes to working your plan, you want to look ahead to the next 90 days for upcoming asks that you have planned and gifts you expect to receive. We are all prone to falling behind on our work. We are only human, especially when you are managing a portfolio of 150 donors. Sometimes staff turns over, people go on vacation, disaster strikes, life happens, and we don't get to our long list of to-dos. Some overdue asks and expected gifts are inevitable. So, we prioritize reaching out to donors to schedule meetings for asks and thanking donors for gifts once they've been received. That's where that 80% of donor-facing revenue generating activity comes into play. So when it comes to overdue asks or expected gifts, it's important to keep your plan updated. And that means if you have to update due dates to reflect a new realistic time frame for you to get your plan back on course, do that. Update your time frame and be realistic. And use your colleagues as thought and accountability partners in that work. So there's a lot of ways to engage with donors. A lot of this will sound familiar. You can do it on your own. You can leverage coworkers and colleagues and volunteer leaders. There's a lot of ways you can do these touches. On your own, you can see these obvious ways to engage donors in your mission, acknowledge and recognize their gifts, and share impact about their contributions. These touch points should happen throughout the year, not just kind of one and done or check the box or when they make their gift or when you're about to ask them. Throughout the year, you should be reaching out and engaging with your portfolio. And it really feels like the natural next step when you are doing these things on a regular basis to then progress to an ask. So you don't have to do all of this work by yourself. In fact, for larger donors, the more you can lean on your colleagues to help deepen the relationships within the organization, the better. I always like to encourage and always like to have multiple touch points with a donor from different avenues within the organization so they feel that extra connection to what is going on and the people that are invested in the same mission and vision that they care about. So if you joined our donor engagement planning conversation 2 weeks ago, you might recall that operationalizing ways that non-relationship managers can play a role in donor engagement is key to everyone knowing and playing out their role and ensuring you can provide an elevated experience to select donors. All donors should be treated well. Not all donors are treated the same, depending on where they fall in that pyramid and those asks that you need to make. So in addition to the engagement plan, developing, depending on the size and structure of your development team, you might have more formal operating procedures for engaging leadership and board in your donor relationships. I think the biggest takeaways here are, moves or next steps don't have to be complicated. In fact, many of them are very simple. As you can see here, like sometimes the simplest moves, like picking up the phone and calling your donor, are actually the most meaningful. So, in order to make this plan truly workable, we recommend having at least one next step planned for every donor in your portfolio. For your top donors in your portfolio, that means those with the greatest potential to grow their giving. You might have 2 or 3 next steps planned, especially if they're involving collaborating with colleagues or engaging board members or your institutional leadership. So ideally, this next step lives in your CRM and is attached to the donor record. As you would with any move, keep on top of your next steps daily. Add them in when needed and mark them complete after you make a call or send an email. There is no better feeling than marking something complete in terms of next steps in a moves management plan and then adding your next step, knowing that you are getting where you want to go. So if you don't have a CRM, it's a good idea to use a shared spreadsheet amongst your team to track information amongst relationship managers so that everybody knows what's going on and what contacts have been made, what outreach is happening, and what next steps are, particularly if you are all kind of working within a similar donor pool or engaging with donors at different times, but the same donors. So helps to create some cohesion. And then in order to always have one open next step, this usually means that every time you complete an action, you'll create a new one. So there should always be a next move with a donor. So for example, if you have an open task to email a donor in your portfolio to request a meeting, once you send that email, it's a good idea to create a new task to follow up with them on that meeting request in a few days if you haven't heard back. When you're managing a large portfolio and tracking next steps for 150 donors at a time, it becomes impossible to keep all of that information in your head. It's impossible to manage 150 relationships at once if you're not writing this down somewhere. So rely on your CRM to hold this information. Log in at the start of your workday and enter all the moves in real time to keep things up to date, because it is very easy to fall behind when your activity is happening like this. So when it comes to working your moves management plan, think about steps related to meetings and outreach. Start by reviewing recently completed meetings and meetings you have coming up in the next week. For outreach, look ahead to the next week and anything that might be overdue. And then regarding meetings, make sure everything you promised to that donor is logged as a next step for completion. Get out any thank yous for meetings. Thank you if they met with you. Thank you for meeting with me. Get those emails out. Confirm your next steps. Share the promised material that you might have had a conversation with a donor about. So for upcoming meetings, make sure you're prepared. Review the donor giving history with your organization and any relevant background or research you have available and can conduct yourself. Identify your goals for meetings and have an agenda or plan for the flow of the meeting, including some questions you'd like to ask or talking points you'd like to share. This is a great opportunity to collaborate with other colleagues. So, looking ahead at your planned outreach, does it still make sense to do everything you had planned? These are questions to ask yourself, and it's okay if you change course. Adjust activities as needed and use this as an opportunity to get ahead if possible, as a gift to your future self. So for those tasks that are overdue, definitely block time to catch up. I find that blocking time in general is wildly helpful for getting work done, especially when it comes to outreach, and then protect those time blocks. So last but certainly not least, update all elements of your plans as you go. Review and update ask plans after every interaction with a donor, and review your entire list of open asks at least one time a month. As you receive gifts, be sure to update the actual gift amounts and dates. Having that information in real time will truly help you. So, within your CRM, it will create a system where your system is working for you and you're not just constantly being, working for a system where it feels like your CRM is just kind of that bane of your existence. So, to recap, the 4 steps to create a path to your goal are: 1, reverse engineer the path to your goal, including some specific numbers or metrics that you can use to keep yourself on track. And then 2, create a short list of relationships to focus on, or in other words, a portfolio. 3, plan the work for that short list. And 4, work the plan. Keep pace with the metrics you've set for yourself. So, going back to our journey, our cross-country journey, the main thing to remember is that a lot of things come down to mindset and organization. Every goal seems overwhelming if we tackle it without a plan, especially when we're looking at goals that are 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures. That can be terrifying without kind of incremental steps along the way. So take a breath, break it down, and plan the work, then work the plan.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, just a few key takeaways here to wrap us up on the presentation. We want to remember that ask planning is important to understand your destination. Moves management is essential to ensure that you're reaching your destination, and planning the work and working the plan is the main key to success for tracking progress towards your goals and ultimately reaching them. So thank you all so much for joining us for the presentation portion of our time together today.